Shoigu rushes to call Putin as Ukraine strikes deep inside Russia, triggering one of the most tense moments the Kremlin has faced in recent months. Late into the night, emergency lines inside Russia's Defense Command reportedly lit up as confirmation came in that Ukrainian forces had successfully carried out a bold and carefully coordinated strike far beyond the front lines. This was not a routine battlefield exchange. This was a message. For the first time in weeks, the sense of security that Moscow tried to project was shaken, and the urgency of the situation forced Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu to immediately brief President Vladimir Putin on what officials described as a critical development. According to sources close to the Russian defense establishment, the strike targeted infrastructure considered strategically valuable, not just symbolically important. These were locations that Russia believed were well protected, far from the reach of Ukrainian capabilities. The fact that Ukraine managed to penetrate Russian defenses so deeply sent shockwaves through military circles and political leadership alike. Shoigu's call to Putin was not just a routine update. It was an emergency warning that the conflict had entered a new and more dangerous phase. Inside the Kremlin, advisors scrambled to assess the damage and, more importantly, the implications. This strike challenged one of Russia's core narratives, that the war could be tightly controlled and largely contained away from its own population centers. Reports suggest that air defense systems were activated too late in some areas, raising uncomfortable questions about preparedness, intelligence failures, and internal coordination. Shoigu, under immense pressure, was forced to explain how Ukrainian forces were able to identify, plan, and execute such a precise operation. For Ukraine, the strike represented more than a military success. It was psychological warfare at its most effective. By hitting deep inside Russia, Kyiv demonstrated that distance no longer guaranteed safety. Analysts believe this move was designed to force Moscow into difficult choices, divert more resources to homeland defense, stretch air defense systems thinner, and potentially reduce pressure on Ukrainian frontline positions. The timing of the strike also appeared deliberate, coinciding with renewed international discussions about military aid and long-term support for Ukraine. As Shoigu briefed Putin, the conversation reportedly focused on three urgent issues: the extent of the damage, the risk of follow-up strikes, and the political fallout at home. Russian citizens, long told that the war was far away, were now confronting the reality that the conflict could reach them directly. Social media inside Russia, despite heavy censorship, quickly filled with videos, rumors, and unanswered questions. The Kremlin's challenge was no longer just military. It was about controlling the narrative and preventing panic. Putin, known for his controlled public image, now faced a test behind closed doors. How would Russia respond without escalating the conflict into a broader confrontation? Retaliation was expected, but any response carried risks. A weak response could be interpreted as vulnerability, while an overly aggressive one could provoke stronger international backlash. Shoigu's emergency call underscored the delicate balance the Kremlin was trying to maintain as the war grew more unpredictable. Military experts point out that Ukraine's growing ability to strike deep targets suggests improved intelligence, better coordination, and possibly more advanced weaponry. Whether domestically produced or supplied by allies, these capabilities are reshaping the battlefield. The message to Russia was clear: no area can be considered completely safe anymore. This realization forces Moscow to rethink its defensive posture and reallocate already strained resources. Within hours of the call, Russian state media began carefully shaping the story. The language was controlled, the details limited, and the tone defensive. Officials emphasized that the situation was under control, even as emergency meetings continued behind the scenes. Shoigu's public appearances were delayed, fueling speculation about internal disagreements and rising pressure within the defense ministry. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, the strike was quietly celebrated as a strategic success. Ukrainian officials avoided excessive public boasting, aware that restraint could be just as powerful as spectacle. The operation showed confidence and capability, signaling to both allies and adversaries that Ukraine remained resilient and innovative despite ongoing challenges on the battlefield. As dawn broke, the implications of Shoigu's emergency call to Putin were becoming clearer. This was not just another incident in a long war. It was a turning point that exposed vulnerabilities and shifted momentum. Russia now faced a harsher reality. Defending its own territory while continuing an offensive abroad is far more difficult than anticipated. The pressure on Putin's inner circle intensified. and the question lingering in Moscow was no longer if Ukraine could strike again, but when and where. In the coming days, the world will watch closely for Russia's response. Shoigu's urgent call may well be remembered as the moment the conflict crossed an invisible line, redefining the scope of the war. One thing is certain: Ukraine's deep strike has changed the strategic equation, and both sides now stand on far more dangerous ground than before.